This episode of Tipping Pitches that you're listening to right now is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it is the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place.
Anchor is really easy to use. It lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone, your computer, your typewriter, wherever you're recording your podcast. So no matter what your setup looks like, you can start creating today.
Then you can distribute your podcast to the most popular listening platforms, including Spotify, with a single tap. Anchor is the only place you can publish video podcasts to Spotify.
With Anchor, not only is it easy to make and distribute your podcasts, but you can also earn money from your podcasts in a variety of ways, including ads and things like podcast subscriptions.
And best of all, Anchor is totally free to use. So if Anchor sounds good to you, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Tell us a little bit about what you saw and being able to relay that message to Cora when you watched Kimbrel pitch and kind of help out so he wasn't tipping his pitches.
So tipping pitches, we hear about it all the time.
People at home understand what tipping pitches is all about.
It's amazing.
And that's remarkable.
Not Alex. Hello. Jordan. Hello.
Hello, Bobby. It is so good to be on this wonderful pod with you again, and I'm sure Alex is feeling hella FOMO.
This is the first time in the Tipping Pitches history where I have introduced a podcast with somebody else that wasn't Alex. If you're listening to this and you're wondering why Jordan Shusterman from Céspedes Family BBQ is on the other line and not Alex Baisley, it's because Alex Baisley is enjoying his life in Colombia. And
Shame
we collectively decided for him not to bring his microphone to record himself talking about trades, which we don't really do here. So instead, I am joined by Jordan Shusterman, who, as I said, is one half of the wonderful Céspedes Family BBQ, to talk about the trade deadline, to do a quick little 10-course meal on the Major League Baseball trade deadline before later in this episode, we invite Evan Drellich and we go back in time to when Alex was still in the United States when we recorded this podcast 10 days ago.
Wow,
so Jordan,
we're really crossing a lot of time zones and just time periods and everything. This is great. I'm excited to be here, though. Thank you for the invite.
Jordan, I've tasked you with preparing a 10-course meal to explain the Major League Baseball trade deadline. You know, have you watched The Bear? Are you in on that yet?
I know I haven't. I guess I'll have to add it to the list now that I just moved. I now have multiple televisions from which I can stream shows. Should I be adding that?
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's only one season, only like 8 episodes. It's not going to ruin your life.
That's the bet. Whenever someone's pitching a show to me, saying it's only one season is really the best thing you can possibly say. It can be nothing that matters more than what the show is about.
Well, we're in on courses. We're in on French brigades. So we're bringing that over to the Tipping Pitches podcast. 10-course meal, Jordan. You know what's included in a 10-course dinner? Hors d'oeuvres, soup, appetizer, salad, fish, main course, palate cleanser, second main course, dessert, and to top it all off, something that I had to look up the pronunciation of before talking about it on a podcast, mignardise.
Mignardise, same.
Who doesn't love a good mignardise?
When you sent me what it was, I also was just surprised to find out what it was in general. But we'll save that. We'll save that for listening. I'm sure there's a good number of people listening wondering what the hell it is. So, you can look it up yourself before we get there, or we can deliver you some delicious mignardise at the end of this, as you said, quick 10-course meal.
Speed like 10-course meal.
Yes.
So, Chef Jordan, what trade is the hors d'oeuvre of our 10-course meal?
I'm going to, hors d'oeuvre. This is one of my favorite parts about any 10-course meal or any sort of meal.
The hors d'oeuvres?
Right? Yeah, the hors d'oeuvres. But I'm going to begin with one
Pigs
trade.
In a blanket?
One trade that should have been one trade that was actually 2 trades, and that's the deals made for some reason separately by the Angels and Phillies on Tuesday afternoon. About 3 hours before the deadline, they, for some reason, swapped Brandon Marsh for catching prospect Logan O'Hoppe. And then right before the deadline, they sent Noah Syndergaard from Anaheim to Philadelphia in exchange for Mickey Moniak. Oh, my goodness. And another prospect. And first and foremost, we couldn't have just done this on the same call. Did we really have to hop back on a new Zoom and nail down this second trade between Dombrowski and Perry Minasian? Is very, very strange. That's the first thing I want to say about it.
Do you think GMs are doing Zooms now? Never even thought about that.
Yeah, I don't know. That
probably not, right?
Not, especially not like you really can't afford to have any Zoom malfunctions on trade deadline day. Like you might just want to have to stick to the landline.
I kind of want a landline. Like I keep telling this to everybody, and they're like, "You're crazy. You're never going to use it."
You think landlines
I want that
come back
feeling,
around?
that tactile feeling of picking up the phone and putting it back down. Like you don't get that anymore. You just press a little button on your touchscreen now,
terrible.
and the call's over. How am I supposed to feel like Billy Beane?
No, I know. The reason why I wanted to start with this one is really just because I think we knew the Phillies were going to do something, and they also got David Robertson from the Cubs, but. Are we feeling like this was enough for the Phillies, who again have like not had a winning season in a decade quietly, and are in the mix?
Not that quietly.
Yeah, I guess quietly. Yeah, not that quietly. And I also like that this trade was, the Phillies have a lot of arguments for kind of being the Angels East recently, right? And so these two teams kind of linking up here. The Angels obviously a complete disaster, but the Phillies still going for it. I just thought it was an interesting pairing of teams, and I have no idea why the Angels already gave up on Brandon Marsh.
It's funny to me that every deadline the Phillies wake up and realize that their team is not actually very good, and they just buy every year.
Gotta do something.
It doesn't matter who the GM is. Doesn't matter what year it is. Doesn't matter where the payroll is at. They're just like, you know what? We got to trade for a good reliever, and then the good reliever comes to the Phillies and is part of a fucking dog shit bullpen, and they don't make the playoffs.
Very true.
I don't know if that's going to be true this year though, because expanded playoffs, they got a chance.
They do have a chance. They did DFA Jerry Familia. That's obviously a win. And Dave Robertson has been good. We'll see how he does in his second tour of duty in Philadelphia.
This is how I know that the Mets are not run by Sandy Alderson anymore, is because they didn't pick up Jerry Familia immediately. We've already spent too much time on the hors d'oeuvres. Thank you for that delicious hors d'oeuvres.
I agree. Let's move on to the
course.
soup.
It's soup time.
Yes. I don't really know why I picked this one as soup, but I did want to talk about it. And that is what the Chicago Cubs did and didn't do. Bobby, I'm currently watching the Cubs play the Cardinals, and they just showed a graphic promoting season tickets. And they had a picture of Wilson Contreras, who for some reason is still on the Cubs. He actually homered today for the Cubs, so that should up his non-existent trade value because, again, the trade deadline is passed. But it was very strange to see them trade their entire bullpen and not Wilson Contreras or Ian Happ.
I frankly can't make any sense of it. It was the most slam dunk put on a fucking platter, not to overdo the 10-course metaphor
I know.
here.
Maybe we should have
but
put
it was
platter
put on a
the
platter for Billy Hepler and the New York Mets to trade for Wilson Contreras. They don't want to call up Francisco Alvarez, apparently. And Wilson Contreras would have been a true rental. He would have been done by the end of this year, and they would have had no use for him past this year because Alvarez is the catcher of the future.
Yep.
Why is he not on the? Why is Ronnie Mauricio not in the Cubs organization?
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, if Ronnie Mauricio was the ask, I guess that's a lot for a rental. But, like, dude, why?
Well, Mauricio and then some other depth pitching prospect for Robertson and Contreras was the trade. Don't understand why it didn't happen.
Yeah, not complicated. Come on. GM Bobby is lapping you, Billy Epler. I mean, come on.
Are we sure that Billy Epler is, like, doing anything?
It's a great question. It's hard to say. So I just think that the Cubs. Now, look, sure though, it's like I guess the Cubs decided if we're not going to get a really awesome prospect, we'll just take the 80th overall pick in the 23 draft. Like, okay, sure, but obviously also just super awkward for Wilson Contreras. So just strange. So
it's time for appetizers.
All right, time for appetizers. Now the appetizer. This is a big one. We're
actually going. Whet my appetite a little bit. We all know what the main course is going to be. So get me going.
We're going to talk about Luis Castillo now, and that's because chronologically, this was the one that set the tone for the deadline. It happened on Friday before, all the madness that happened on Monday and Tuesday. Jerry D, the general manager of my favorite team, making the 133rd trade of his Mariners tenure. And that's not a joke. That's a real number. Making another huge deal with the Reds. He is single-handedly after the Suarez and Winker trade before the season, he is single-handedly replenishing the Reds farm system. I don't know why he is taking it upon himself to do that. But really what this was deciding we need a legit dude pitcher, which I really appreciate because Again, the Mariners teams of the last 5 years have not exactly had dudes with real stuff. And did they overpay a little bit with the prospect package? Perhaps. But that's how you get the deal done. That's how you get the player. Finishing second in these situations is not a very fun feeling. And after watching Luis Castillo against the Yankees yesterday, I'm feeling great about the deal. I wish the best to all the prospects that went to Cincinnati, but I think this was a great deal for Seattle. And I think if it's part of what gets them in the postseason, let alone makes them slightly more competent in the postseason, I think this is a no-brainer. And everyone being like, "Oh my God, this trade package is better than the one that Soto." Like, no, shut up. It's fine. Relax. It's okay. These are A-ball shortstops. Long way to go. It's fine. Yes, they gave up a lot, but that's how you get these deals done. So credit to Jerry D. I was very happy with this deal. What did you think about this one?
Wait, before I tell you what I think about it, because I don't do actual baseball analysis here.
Oh, sorry.
Are you familiar with the drill tweet? Is Wario a libertarian, the greatest threat in the history of forums, locked by a moderator after 12,239 pages of heated debate?
Are you going to compare this to Jerry Dipoto?
Is Jerry Dipoto a good GM? The greatest threat in the history of forums?
Yes.
Locked by moderators. Reopened by moderators after this trade. Because you know what? This is some substance. This is something to chew on.
It's true. And I've said this before. When you make 130 plus trades in 5
one of them
6 or 7 years, you're going to have some huge wins and you're going to have some huge disasters, right? And that kind of leaves you in a spot where it's like, I don't know.
Which column would you put Jared Kelenic in?
That's a good question. At this stage, after the home run against the Yankees, I think it's an obvious win. It's fine. I'm very happy for Edwin Diaz. Hey, that trade's not didn't happen this deadline. Shut up. I don't want to hear about it.
Shout out to us for maintaining our friendship through all of this Mets Mariners nonsense.
There are still many ups and downs to be had. What we do know is that Robinson Cano is no longer playing baseball. All right, let's move on to
Salad course. And this one is kind of off of the Castillo one, but this is an important one. We knew this one was coming. It's Frankie Montas to the Yankees. Now, this one, it seemed like Yankees fans, by the way, also funny yesterday, the Yankees fans clamoring for Luis Castillo, having him dominate them yesterday, was immediately after the deadline, was very hilarious. But hey, they did make a nice little deal for Frankie Montas. I prefer Castillo over Montas. I said that before the Mariners traded for him. But this does seem like a weird move, or a totally good move. We'll get to the weird move in our next course. But this, I don't know. I mean, I think Frankie's fine. I guess I wish we had our friend Alex Baisley here to tell us about Frankie Montas. But Alex doesn't know who the Oakland A's are.
Oh, never mind. That's a good point. They haven't even existed the whole season. But this was nice. This was a great example of, like, for most teams trading for Frankie Montas, everyone, it's like, this is awesome, amazing. And instead, every Yankees move is just like, all right, great. What are we doing next? On to the next one. It's like, all right, Pablo Lopez, come on, make it happen.
Okay, fish course.
Off of that one. Oh my God, we got Frankie Montas. This is amazing. He's going to make our rotation so deep and so great. Oh, just kidding. Let's trade Jordan Montgomery to the Cardinals for Harrison Bader, who can't walk. I'm a
little disappointed you didn't put the Anthony Bass trade in the fish course.
I thought about it, but I didn't have that much to say about a Blue Jays Marlins trade, so I wanted to spare your audience of that.
I'm just proud of Anthony Bass for being able to enter Canada.
Here's why, and Zach Pop, who's already Canadian, so I'm sure he was in good shape. This is why I'm putting Jordan Montgomery and Harrison Bader for fish. Not for everyone. This trade is not. I don't particularly like fish.
You're not a seafood guy.
I'm not a seafood guy, so I didn't really like this trade. I have talked to some, my lovely colleague Pedro Mora. I talked to him yesterday. He was like, "No, I actually like it. Like, it's for the postseason."
Wow, Pedro Mora name drop. Okay, elite media member Jordan Shusterman.
I know. I mean, and he's a colleague. He's a colleague and a friend. Yeah.
Did you talk to Jeff Passan at all, or maybe Ken Rosenthal?
Maybe. Who knows? Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. But I can tell you that there are some people that like fish, but I am not one of them. And it does not appear that Yankees fans are particularly thrilled with this move either. If this was straight up and Harrison Bader was healthy, I do think Harrison Bader is being a little bit underrated at this point, and everyone thinks he's like a terrible hitter when he's merely just like a below average hitter who is a great defender. But it is insane, the fact that he is just in a walking boot and can't play for the next month, and the Yankees just dealt away their 4-starter. It's pretty wild.
The confusing part to me is, don't you think they could have gotten this trade done without giving up Jordan Montgomery?
Right. I would think so, but obviously the Cardinals were desperate for starting pitching, so I guess they said, this is the only thing we're going to
trade for an actually good left-handed pitcher after signing Steven Matz.
Yes, and trading for Jose Quintana. Yeah, that's actually a great point. Hopefully Jordan Montgomery is better for them than Steven Matz. But I liked it for the Cardinals and Bader. Now they move Carlson over to center field. But yeah, I mean, look, was Jordan Montgomery going to start in the playoffs for the Yankees? Probably not. But like, pitchers get hurt. I don't know if you heard about that. And that seems like something that could happen.
Including Frankie Montas, who's missed like 40% of the year.
Including Frankie Montas, right? And that's why it was just so funny when this trade happened like 10 minutes before the deadline, and Yankees fans were like, "Oh, well, that just means we're getting Pablo Lopez." Obviously, this just means Pablo Lopez. And then it was like by 6:30,
federal government to commission the study on Yankees fans' brains. Mass study. We need people to start volunteering for it, like they volunteer for organ donation.
Yes.
Like we need this. We need to understand it more.
And then at 6:30, Yankees fans were like, "Oh well, guess we just have Harrison Bader in a walking boot. All right." And Jordan Montgomery
and then Garrett Cole got absolutely lit up the next morning.
And Garrett Cole got absolutely crushed. So yeah, it was what a sequence for the Yankees. All right,
it's time for the main course.
It's time for the main course. Now we all know what one of the main courses is going to be, but I actually, for the first main course, I actually want to talk about Josh Hader.
Oh,
obviously, look, it's all about the Padres, but I think we have to talk about Josh Hader because this is a pretty wild move. It's more so for the Brewers.
Yes.
Now, last year, I think Ken Rosenthal made the comparison in his piece about the trade deadline to the Kendall Graveman trade last year, in terms of the Mariners just like giving away like a very important part of their clubhouse for team control, for club control of Abraham Toro and whatever. And we don't have to relitigate
Kendall,
that.
I'm just asking questions and doing my own research, Graveman.
Exactly. But I will say that the vibes seemingly in the Brewers clubhouse after this trade were similar in the sense that they were like, what is like, you can't explain to my simple baseball player brain why we would just trade our closer when we're in first place. Like,
that's a dude. That's a guy that I see that I don't think that I could get hit off of. Why are we trading him?
Right. And then for Devin Williams to immediately give up a walk-off home run last night in his first save. Like, it was just one of those things where like, baseball karma was pretty bleak there. And it was I know they've been trying to sort of move Hader for a while. And like, I generally am team sell high on relievers because relievers are volatile. That's fine. But in this case, I just think this was a pretty wild decision. And even though it could actually work out for them in the long run, like I like some of the players they got, pretty bold move at the stage that they're at for Milwaukee here. And obviously it's just a footnote of the Padres deadline, but like, that's pretty insane that they also got Josh Hader on their team. I
feel like we've maybe been doing a bad job of saying what the actual trades are. Like we're assuming people know what the trades are, but Josh Hader for
Taylor
Rogers.
So it's just like, he's a left-handed reliever. Like, what's the difference? Dinelson Lamet, who they've already DFA'd, probably one of the worst medicals left in baseball. And then Esteury Ruiz, a really speedy outfielder who maybe will play center field for them. And then I'm forgetting who the fourth piece was.
That's not that important.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
What is important?
Right, he's good. Yeah.
Oh, right. He is good. Yeah. Good pitcher name.
Good pitcher. Yes, that's true.
What is important is that I was listening to the Effectively Wild trade deadline episode yesterday, and they said that this is basically the only instance in the history of baseball since we started tracking saves in a real way where two teams have exchanged their saves leaders at the deadline.
Oh, yeah. It certainly seems that way. But again, if I could exchange Taylor Rogers for Josh Hader, I would do that. So again, easy move for the Padres. I mean, whatever. Like, again, I think this could work out down the line, but like for the Brewers, it's not like they need to get over the hump now, right? Like, and Josh Hader, I feel like could probably be a big part of that. Not that it's worked super well for him in the postseason so far.
Weird
but you know what? That's
move for future GM of the New York Mets, David Stearns. Okay,
you're still hoping that he's so he can make moves like this for the Mets.
It's time for the palate cleanser, Jordan. Well, he only made a move like this because of his broke boy ownership.
No, very
it's
true.
Not going to be a problem in Queens.
Yeah. I don't know how broke boy the Brewers. This seems more like he just really wants to be the Rays, even though
your
his payroll
fave Mark
is
Attanasio.
Like, exactly. We love Mark. Not
selected in the least terrible owners draft by Jordan Shusterman and Jim.
I know. Not as much when I picked the learners. That doesn't look so good. We did take John Sherman. I'm still feeling good about that one.
I need my palate cleansed now. It's time for the palate
we got to move away from the Padres, and we got to talk about Joey Gallo to the Los Angeles Dodgers.
This is supposed to cleanse my palate? It's a little bitter, don't you think?
Yes. Well, right. Exactly. I'm going for a bit of irony here, right? Because Bobby, it was like, oh, Joey Gallo, like, I said this when I revealed all the trades to Jake, but it's like if you thought Gallo, it's like we got to get him out of the spotlight, or at least somewhere where like the pressure is not really going to be as high. And that's maybe the case with the Dodgers. Maybe he doesn't even make the postseason roster if he's like still this crappy. But I just think this is wild for him to end up now on just the other best team in the league. I think, and honestly, I also love it because it's like, we've been hearing Yankees fans talking about how much Joey Gallo sucks. And then it's like the Dodgers of all teams are like, yeah, it's fine. We got it. We're good. We want him. We still want him. We still want him. So
the absolute top 1 percentile outcome of this is Joey Gallo hitting a walk-off homer in the World Series against the Yankees. Like, please
just get us somewhere close to that, right?
Anywhere near it.
I'm still hoping for the Carlos Correa, Gary Sanchez, Gio Urshela back-to-back homers to eliminate the Yankees and have the Twins beat the Yankees for the first time in the postseason. That's honestly more realistic than I think the Joey Gallo in the World Series one.
Yeah, probably.
But we will see. All right. I wonder what the second main course is going to be.
I think I know, but I'll let you serve it to me, Chef.
All right, you ready?
Yes.
Bobby, Mackenzie Gore is on the move.
Former top
Mackenzie
pitching
Gore,
prospect.
One of the great pitching prospects we have seen in the last 20 years. There was no. He's the next Clayton Kershaw. Oh my God!
Thank you to the learners.
They've
landed Mackenzie Gore.
And all the struggles that he had, the mechanics, the injuries. Now he's injured again, but he was
all the
scouts
saying that he actually sucks.
But then he was really good for the first half of the season, and for the Nationals to land a guy like Mackenzie Gore, I mean. Mike Rizzo, this guy, World Series pedigree, he knows.
But what did they give up?
Oh, I'm reading the fine print here. Oh, sorry. They gave up not only a future Hall of Famer who's 23, they also gave up the second best hitter at the deadline, right? Quickly, Josh Bell, not a throw-in, second best hitter available. And he's just like, oh yeah, we'll just try. And
makes no sense why they didn't make that in 2 separate moves and make another team pay a premium for Josh Bell. It makes absolutely 0 sense.
It's extremely bizarre. Okay, Juan Soto's on the Padres. So I guess we should say that. Like, I saw him. He played for the Padres last night. I watched it.
Yeah, weird. You are one of the great chroniclers of Juan Soto's young career. You've been there from the beginning. You were on the boat before he even got called up. You were making jokes about how he couldn't drink when he was winning series for the Washington Nationals.
I know. He was, right. He turned 21 during after they won the World Series or during the parade or during the World Series or something. He's my favorite player. I can't believe they actually traded him. We don't have to litigate. Oh, well, he was never going to sign there. And if he was going to reject every extension offer, I know Rizzo came out and said, like,
that's for me and Alex to do in the offseason.
Exactly. That's for you to do later. Let's just deal with the facts. Juan Soto is not on the Nationals anymore, and there's no reason to go see the Nationals. Did they get some good young players who might help them not be terrible forever? Yes, fine. That doesn't mean you win the trade ever, no matter how many prospects you get. And for the Padres, it's absolutely amazing, and I'm really happy for them, and I hope that it's enough to even come close to the Dodgers, because if not, it's really depressing. But the thing is, they got 2 more years of Juan Soto too, so even if it doesn't happen this year, Juan Soto maybe still peaking. Who knows? Fernando Tatis Jr. hasn't played a game yet this season. Or has he played a game? I can't remember if he came. No, he hasn't. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be a spectacle. Even last night's lineup was like pretty hard to wrap my mind around, and knowing that Tatis is coming is really exciting. And I just hope it works. Like, I want to see that kind of aggression from Preller work, because it hasn't so far. It really hasn't worked out. He's really turned for a lot of good players, and they just haven't won very much. And so I would like it to work so that other GMs think that they also need to make crazy moves like this. But I just love Juan Soto. I hope he's happy. And yeah. They really did it.
He feels like the one basketball GM in a world of baseball GMs. He's just like stars. Fuck the picks. Fuck the. Oh, you want? Oh, Sam Presti. You want 38 first round picks? Fine, take them.
Bobby, I've heard this is a stars league.
This league?
It's about the third. You have to get a third star.
Why aren't we doing that kind of coverage about baseball? Why aren't we carrying the water like that? Like, anytime when Eric Hosmer went to the Red Sox.
Oh, we're getting to that. We're getting to that for dessert.
Oh, sorry.
Here.
I didn't mean to step on dessert. Dessert. Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Because it's so delicious.
All right. Second main course was Juan Soto.
Yes.
It's time for dessert now.
now we get to dessert because we're coming off.
Let's pace this out. I need like 10 minutes after that second main course. I'm getting full, Jordan. I am full.
That's true. That said, I think we have to talk about the Eric Hosmer saga for dessert because Bobby, down. It was delicious. So AJ Preller signed Eric Hosmer for 8 years, $144 million. Within a year and a half, he was like, man, I got to get rid of this guy. And he has been trying so desperately to do this for years, even though everyone's like, Hosmer's the leader. Hosmer has postseason experience. Everyone loves him in the clubhouse. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you know what? First of all, by the way, I do think we now have also made Eric Hosmer sound like he's the worst baseball player in the world, when merely he's just probably making too much money for how good he is.
He's like the definition of league average.
He's fine. He's totally fine. But fine is not good enough for in a stars league, right? We're trying to get
Fine's not good enough in this league.
This league, hashtag this league. And so he's been trying to trade Eric Hosmer. And I love that he gets, this is it. This is the epic climax of the AJ Preller experience, right? It's trading for Juan Soto. And he couldn't resist but try and get Eric Hosmer into this deal. And my genuine theory, and I don't know if there's any reporting, I'll just throw allegedly in there. I am so confident that Mike Rizzo at the outset of this was like, oh yeah, we'll take Hosmer. And Mike Rizzo's like, yeah, we'll take Hosmer. And then like, he's like looking to his like AGM. He's like, Hosmer is going to reject this trade. Like, there's no way. Like, it doesn't matter. So he's like, so they put in Hosmer so they could get maximum prospects, right? And then then it's like, oh no, Hosmer's not accepting this. And at that point, Preller has completely backed himself into a corner, and he has to just be like, fuck it, Luke Voigt, sure, whatever. And then more importantly, it's like, well, gotta send Hosmer somewhere. Can't be having him walk back in here when I desperately tried to trade him. And so he just sends him to the Red Sox, who Red Sox, we haven't really mentioned yet, probably had one of the more perplexing deadlines of any team, which was pretty hilarious. But this whole saga and just like Eric Hosmer like stopping the trade from happening is just an all-time thing. And I'm glad he did.
There was never a chance that he was going to really stop the trade, though, right? Like
no,
there's no way that AJ Preller was like, actually, all the marbles rest on this.
No, of course not. But it is still funny that like he was clearly in the trade. And the notion that AJ Preller thought he wouldn't reject it is hysterical.
Without checking first.
Because like if there was ever a time to use a no trade clause under almost any circumstance, it would be being sent to the 2022 Washington Nationals.
Exactly. So that was one of the funniest parts about this is that people were like, well, why would Eric Hosmer, who's been living in San Diego and on the Padres and signed an 8-year deal, so presumably he has like a long-term living situation in San Diego, why would he and his family want to move to Washington to be part of the shittiest team in baseball for the next 3 years? And then, like, not 2 hours later, he got flipped to Boston. So,
yes.
Like, in terms of a living situation, marginal difference. Marginal at best. Yes. But in terms of a baseball situation, I guess it's cool to play in Fenway. The Red Sox are much better. Yes. There are actual good teams there. There are actual good players there. And it's a pretty great manager. Like,
at least for now. Yeah, no, that's true. I will say, to be fair, I'm pretty sure it was a no trade list and not a no trade clause. So I'm not sure if Boston was on there and he rejected, or if he couldn't have. But the Nationals were obviously on the list, so he rejected him. So it's possible that he had no say. So maybe there were some funnier places he could have been sent than Boston. But I just love that it added to the weirdness that was the Boston deadline.
Yes.
So that was, man. God, Hosmer Preller is just one of the funniest things ever. And the last thing we have to say about this, Luke Voigt. Oh man, that's just
tough beat.
That's just really tough.
You got to come to the NL East. You got to face Jacob deGrom a couple times for the rest of the year. That's really.
You know what brutal. I hope they do? I hope that the Nationals like market Luke Voigt as like the greatest home run hitter in the world. Like that's honestly their only hope. And honestly, Luke Voigt's like one of the only reasons you should go to the games. So,
and that's saying something because Luke Voigt, he's like fine. He's fine.
He's fine.
He's fine. He's coasting off the fact that he just keeps taking buttons down and down and down, but he's not actually that good of a baseball player.
That has become his thing, and it is apparently enough of a thing.
All right, it's time for the Mignardies. Have we saved enough room for it, Jordan? It's a one bite dessert.
Bobby,
to knock your socks off. Do we have enough
Bobby.
room for the Mignardies?
Bobby, you always have room for some Mets talk, right? Look, were there bigger trades that we could still talk about? The Twins had a really nice deadline. Could we talk about the Orioles? Yeah, but that's not exactly sweet and delicious. We don't want to talk about that. We got to talk about the Mets and what they did and what they didn't do. And mostly because if there's anyone that probably would enjoy some Mignardies, it would be Darren Ruff and Daniel Vogelbach, who have combined to create the beefiest platoon in all the land. And look,
beefiest and the best. This is the delicious Mignardies.
I don't think has Darren Ruff had an at bat yet. Vogie. First of all, Vogie. Let's just talk about Vogie for a second. To see him on the freaking back page of the New York Post, swinging for his grand slam, his first homer, like the glow up for Vogie is just amazing, and I am so happy for him, and I hope that it continues. I love that he is getting this national attention because obviously his career started. Actually, he is the reason the Cubs broke the drought. So that's the first thing. Remember, he was traded from the Cubs for Mike Montgomery, who got the final out. So the Cubs do not win the World Series without Daniel Vogelbach. So
that's exactly right. Yes.
But for him to start his career, with my beloved Mariners, to be a part of the 2019 Mariners that started 15-4, and he was an all-star and everything, and then to just have it go totally south. Traded to the Blue Jays for 3 days, and then Milwaukee, and then now with Pittsburgh, and then now on the big stage in Queens is amazing. At the same time, to come out of this deadline with Vogie, Darren Ruff, Michael Givens, whose ERA with the Mets is 17 million now, and Tyler Naquin, who's just like Texas Travis Jankowski, is certainly what is it? You tell me, Bobby, what the hell, just as I'm wondering what the hell Mignardies is, tell me what the hell this deadline was for your New York Mets.
It was mid. It was
Mignardies.
That's exactly right. I don't know. I think that there's a decent case to be made that it's not the flashiest deadline ever, but that certainly
an easy case to be. I think an easy case to be made.
But that they identified the problem that they had, which was that they had no power at the DH spot, and they, via a platoon, have remedied that problem. And it's a pretty damn good platoon. I think Vogelbach at this point in his career, they're not going to try to make him out to be more than he is good at doing already. He gets on base, he walks, and he hits right-handed pitching for power. And Darren Ruff is the exact opposite now. At this, he's like 40, so we know pretty consistently that
36, but still under team control next year because he never. So yeah, it's very weird. They did trade like a crazy amount for Darren Ruff.
Don't want to talk about it,
which we can skip over that part. I'm also very convinced that JD Davis will be fixed with the Giants.
Oh, 100%.
Easily, right?
Yeah.
Easily. And they have him for a few more years. So that's like
he is the exact profile of player that they're going to turn into a 160 WRC plus.
100%. Farhan is salivating. But I do agree that functionally they did improve. And I do like
not getting a left-handed reliever that hurts. That would have maybe overwhelmed the Mignardies course, though. So that's why they didn't do it. They knew this was coming. They knew this segment was coming. We've too much food.
We've already had 9 courses, Bobby. We've already signed Max Scherzer. Okay,
yeah,
just freaking chill out. We have Jacob deGrom back. All right, like it's fine. We're fine. But yeah, so I think that I just want to make sure
getting Jacob deGrom back is like going out for a in and out double after your 10-course meal. That's amazing.
Yeah. It's like, really, we still have room. Is that really possible? But yeah, I think those are really the big ones. I think we covered everything besides, the Orioles and the Twins, which is fine.
That's for another day. Jordan Shusterman, one half of Céspedes Family BBQ. Thank you so much for your real baseball analysis. Thank you so much for filling in pinch hitting for one Alex Basley, who I hope is enjoying his time in Colombia and who will be part of the interview with Evan Drellich coming up right after this break. Jordan, where can people find what you're working on? You're pretty good at this podcasting thing. Have you ever thought about doing one?
Nah, man, people have told me that, and maybe someday I will finally do a podcast.
Well, let me know if you ever do. I'd love to be part of it.
This was a nice test run. Yeah, that'd be sweet, man. Are you kidding me? I would love that. That's like our chemistry feels like we've been doing this for years. All right. Foxsports.com is where you could find all of my writing and Jake's writing. Jake Mintz, he's the other guy. He's not here. We shouldn't even tell Jake that I did this, and he'll just see it in his podcast feed. And then
he won't see it.
Yeah, he won't see it. Foxsports.com is really where you can see our stuff. And just follow on Twitter at Céspedes BBQ. And maybe, who knows, maybe we'll have a podcast at some point in the near future. Maybe we will. But
you, Jordan.
In the meantime, just keep enjoying tipping pitches. Yay, bye. Thanks, Bobby.
Okay, we are now joined by the Athletics' Evan Drellich. Evan, I think that you are probably the person whose articles we have cited the most often on the Tipping Pitches podcast. So it's fitting that you are now finally joining us after much time. How are you, dude?
It's amazing that a podcast where my articles are cited often would actually still exist, that people haven't been bored to tears by all the things I write about. But I'm doing all right, guys. How are you?
That's the beauty of Tipping Pitches. This niche little community where we care so much about finance and labor.
Yeah,
and weird baseball shit.
You noted
Nerds.
in your email conversation leading up to this, you clarified that you don't really talk about any of the on-field stuff, and our listeners
just those little distractions on the field.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I think our listeners are champing at the bit to have more discussions about on-field stuff.
I get these texts from radio stations that want to talk about the trade deadline. And it is weird as being a national baseball writer and being like, yeah, I'm not covering that. I don't really know. Please go ask Ken Rosenthal or any of the other dozens of reporters who actually cover that. I can tell you about the latest U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee letter. That's what I can tell you about. So
yeah, you just got to set up text message forwarding with Ken, get him in a group chat with all the radio producers so that you don't have to let them down easily every time.
I'm sure he'd love that. That would really make his day.
Well, we wanted to start by talking about that actually, because, you were covering the Astros for a while as a beat. And then I think that your beat slowly morphed as you became more national and more focused on labor and kind of the financial things that we talk about so frequently, which is why we're citing your articles. But how did that happen? At what point did you look around and say, this is something that I think is going to be a big enough story that I could basically cover it for my full-time job?
Yeah, I always, even before covering the Astros, had something of an interest in the off-the-field stuff. I was an MLB.com reporter at one point, and we had an assignment, which was a good assignment from the editor who I reported to at the time, which was we had to do Enterprise every week. And that's good training. I remember doing a story on how retired players were making ends meet and the career transition, and the union at that time. I think they've since done something. They were thinking about a career transition program and that kind of stuff. But then I get to Houston. So I go from MLB.com to MassLive.com as a Red Sox beat writer. And that was only for the 2013 season when the Red Sox won the World Series. And I get to Houston, and the whole project was so oriented around the CBA, right? Everything that was going on with the Astros during that Crane-Luno rebuild, was influenced by what the CBA said. So tanking, service time, you name it. They were searching for advantages, efficiencies, the outgrowth of Moneyball, yada, yada. So if I was going to cover that team effectively or what I thought would be effectively, I didn't really have a choice but to get really intimate with labor in baseball. And it turned out that I actually found it fascinating and really interesting. And so I left Houston. I went back to Boston. I worked a couple places in Boston, and I was still I remember writing for the Boston Herald about, market rank disqualification in the 2016 CBA, which is something nobody cares about. It mattered in Houston in the previous CBA. But so I still had that interest there. And then toward the end of my time in Boston, I did this long story on the union, and kind of where they were at. I think it was in 18. I did this story coming off of the 16 negotiations, which everybody said went poorly. And I realized at that point that, I like that stuff, and I got let go in Boston. And I started talking to the Athletic, and, I've used this in literally every cover letter I've written. A reporter first. Yeah. A reporter first who happens to write about sports. That's the approach I've tried to take. That doesn't mean that I'm perfectly adept at, freedom of information requests. I've done some in my career, but that's the approach I've tried to take. And so there was a natural interest that developed, and you can probably largely thank the Houston Astros for fostering that natural interest.
We love to thank the Houston Astros on this podcast. Very frequently, we're saying thank you so much for creating this baseball environment. Were you getting like pushback from editors at those earlier stages when you were writing those labor stories that were very interesting to you? And were people saying to you, like, of course people aren't going to read this dummy. Nobody wants to talk about labor. Nobody wants to talk about the CBA legal documents. They want to talk about Mookie Betts or, the stars of the Red Sox at the time.
No, and I think that's probably because at that stage I was still quite enthusiastic and still was, effectively covering the on-field stuff too. I would still do my daily column when I was at NBC Sports Boston about whatever happened in the Red Sox game that night. And so it was more pet projects on the side. I don't remember anybody in Houston. I wrote a lot, there were blog posts in addition to what ran in print. And they kind of let me go. And so, I should be thankful for that I didn't have anybody step in and say, nobody cares about this, Evan. But it was certainly germane in Houston to what was going on. And I still kind of kept up with it in Boston. I mean, I did get fired at my last job in Boston. So maybe that was part of the problem, was they wanted more like trade rumors and not like these think pieces. Cause I was going off on, I was doing longer stories that, might not have always been on the hottest topic of the day, when they would have preferred like me somehow connecting Kevin Durant, Jaylen Brown trade rumors to the Red Sox.
The
WEIification
of Evan Drellich.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I was at a TV station they were the Celtics broadcast partner, and they had a lot of talk radio people on TV. Like, a lot of that job was what they wanted was reacting to sports talk radio, truly. And I was on WEI separately. So,
yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like, maybe not the sort of venue that is as welcoming to that sort of discussion, but the type of kind of reporting that you were doing feels particularly kind of germane to this moment that we're in now, right? Where it feels we're at a point where it's so open how the CBA actually does influence what's going on the field, right? I feel like for many years, a lot of fans have kind of tried to distinguish the two parts of baseball, right? There's the sport of baseball, and then there's kind of the business of baseball. And I only need to really know about that first part, right? I'm only interested in kind of what's going on in the field. It's millionaires versus billionaires. I want to, I just want to watch some games. Have the contours of this sort of beat over the last couple of years, have they gone as you've kind of expected? Like, have they gone to the places that you think you kind of would be going? Because sometimes news comes out of the commissioner's office or whatever, and I'm like, I don't envy the person who has to like write about this with a straight face.
Yeah. It's looking over proposals the sides made on the international draft. It's like, man, I don't have a law degree. Why is this written in such an arcane fashion? It could be annoying. Yeah, I think it's gone largely. The fun part of my job has been learning as I go along. So, and the story I keep thinking about in that context is actually one I did last year, where I finally kind of sat down and was like, all right, so what does the antitrust exemption actually do in baseball? Because we all know it's there. But I didn't have a totally deep understanding of it. And, so I started to reach out to people, and I did a story that I hope was digestible, but and I hope people learned, but I learned, right? And part of the fun of it is actually learning about these things behind the scenes. When I took over the job, at the Athletic, I didn't know, I remember being scared of labor history a bit. I mean, to an extent, I still am. It's so in depth. And there's so many years of decisions and things that have happened that, I'm not a historian, but learning about Marvin Miller. I did a long story on Marvin Miller when he got inducted last year, and so that's been, the joy of it. And I think I'm naturally attracted a bit to the levers of power element of this, that appeals to me. And it definitely has directly, kind of to the first part of your question there. Because so much of what you see on the field is influenced by it, I'm not lying to say my interest in the on the field action has naturally waned anyway, right? Like 95% of the stories I do, you could just end with a simple sentence. It's about money! ! Right? And that can be a little. I am probably as far behind the curtain as most media members are, at least kind of down the rabbit hole, right? Where it is hard for me to separate the off the field stuff from the on the field stuff. And it naturally kind of, it takes away some of the magic. There's no question about that. But I am glad to have learned and seen as much as I have. Because it has, the things in the minor leagues that are going on, and I trust lately, there has been a lot in the last 3.5 years that's come up that wasn't quite as prominent before.
Definitely. And I want to talk about all of those things and just how much it's changed in the last couple of years. Even what we've noticed talking about this, I would describe us as kind of like secondhand sources to what's going on in the labor and baseball world, where we talk about it every week for sure, but we don't report anything. We kind of read what you're reporting and then talk to people that we know on the minor league side, and then we kind of digest what is going on in between that. But I think we probably need to talk about a major event in labor and baseball in the last 12 months, which is the CBA negotiations, which you were very, very, very deeply involved in, and not to mine that recent personal history, which was probably very challenging from a reporting standpoint and a personal standpoint, just being down there and walking through so many parking lots, just so many steps.
Well, we weren't in the parking lot. We were on the street through a gated, through a kind of like I don't know if it was iron, some sort of.
Oh, you were watching them in the parking lot, right?
Watching them go through the parking lot. And then we would change which little parking lot corridor we would watch through. There was one main parking lot, and then there was a smaller little parking lot. So
wow, it's like the worst festival in the world. There's the main parking lot and then the side parking lots.
Do you ever you have those moments where you realize it's so dumb that we organize society like this? That's got to be one of those moments.
Yeah.
You mentioned that when you started getting into covering this beat, it was right around 2017-18. It was in the fallout from the 2016 CBA negotiations. So being right in it, being in the middle of a CBA negotiation, now with a little bit of hindsight, a little bit of retrospect, what was it like to cover that, and how did it differ from your expectations as you headed into it?
I guess if I had really been right in the middle of it, they would have let us in the room to chronicle everything. But yeah, I guess as much as media was, I don't think I've actually thought about that. What did it play out? What I imagined it playing out like? I remember when the lockout started, telling Ken, I think I was briefly doing a labor podcast for The Athletic, and I might have even said it in our first episode or one of the early episodes, where I was kind of left with the feeling of like, oh man, what happens now? Like it was because I turned 35 this year, and I was not a baseball fan in 94. I would have been probably too young to have any real cognizance of what was going on then. Anyway,
refined labor takes.
Yeah, right. At the age of 7. So it was very foreign to me, and I guess I didn't quite, I knew there was a possibility I would end up having to stalk some meetings somewhere. It was largely the reason I moved to New York, was so that I could be close. I'm from New York, but I was in Boston, and I think The Athletic and I were talking about whether it would make sense for me to stay in Boston, but they wanted me in New York, and that was smart, because I could go, to the union's offices or the league's offices even before the lockout to get to know people and talk to people and yada yada, cover press conferences, etc. I don't know if anything could have prepared me. It's grueling. It is what I would say it was, because it is as close to politics as baseball gets. MLB literally hired a former Hillary Clinton campaign operative, a spokesperson, a guy named Glenn Kaplan, to guide them through the lockout and through other difficult issues, right? They hired a campaign manager. and both sides always want their information out there. They don't always want to say it on the record, very rarely want to say it on the record. And so there's a burden when everybody's talking anonymously, that you try not to get used. You try not to get played. You try to make sure the information is accurate. And because it's legal matters, you're constantly, the wording of every sentence can tick somebody off. And often it would be like, there were stories where I would feel I had been diligent on every sentence but one. And then that one sentence was the one that somebody was like, well, I have a problem with it for this, that, and the other reason. And you look, you can't care about every grievance everybody has, but that's what you're dealing with, and it gives me, empathy for people who are covering regular politics. And I, if you're covering regular politics, you at least know that work is, it's kind of tied to the greater good ultimately, or at least it's affecting a broader swath of people. The insular nature of baseball, yes, it is important. Yes, it is a proxy for a lot of people to understand labor. Like I like to think that people through my work might gain an interest. My work and others' work might gain an interest in some of these topics that they wouldn't have had otherwise. Because I have, but by writing about it, I'm more attuned to labor dynamics in general than I had been previously. But you don't at the end of the day have that sense when you're covering, I don't know, a senatorial race that like, this is affecting a very large group of people. So it's a lot of squeeze, and sometimes you're left with the feeling of, I don't like this sour juice, but
it's a very, very good way of putting it, I think.
Yeah. Lemons.
You mentioned kind of that, maybe hesitance on the part of either Major League Baseball, or the Players Union to really kind of comment publicly on some topics, and that can be challenging for a whole host of reasons. And you wrote astutely, I think, last month, about one of the major topics, that's been a part of the CBA that has, maybe not coincidentally been one of the most, kind of hard to understand, opaque, that being the international draft, right? Which is kind of the outstanding piece from the CBA negotiations. And obviously over the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot going on with that. I want to kind of talk about why you think that it's being kind of treated in the way that it is. But I also would just love to ask you kind of what that negotiation kind of looks like right now, because it's something that we're interested in, but we haven't talked a lot about in depth on this podcast. So like for the folks who maybe are less familiar with what is going on in those negotiations, can you kind of give that top level overview of like what that looks like right now?
Yeah, well, so it just ended, which is, I don't mind that. The league made a final proposal, or what it billed as a final proposal to the players. And the players rejected that on Monday, which was the deadline that they had agreed to back in March. So there's not going to be an international draft in the near future. The caveat there is like, theoretically, any side can make a proposal at any point, but I think more likely is that it becomes something that gets discussed in the next round of bargaining. They could always reopen it if they want. They could always do something before then. But they had a deadline. The deadline arrived and there was no deal. The main trade-off, the main proposition that was on the table was an international draft arrives and the qualifying offer goes away. And the owners have long wanted a draft. The draft system is always better for teams and clubs and owners because there's no competition. You don't have, you have your draft pick and that's your player, and you don't have to outbid another team for that player. And that's not what the current international system is. So it's something owners have always wanted. Players would certainly like to get rid of the qualifying offer, which, affects really just the best free agents. So some of them are, had been international amateurs at one point, although it's not directly in that space. It affects free agents generally. And then there's this whole other context that's quite significant of the corruption that goes on internationally in the Dominican Republic and other Latin American countries where there are early deals. So kids have to be 16 to sign, but they agree sometimes years ahead of that with teams, and teams are willing to make those agreements. And a draft probably would have eliminated a lot of early deals, but whether it would have fully or fairly addressed the other problems that exists for those players is another question. They have to pay a lot of money to their trainers and handlers. Sometimes 40-50% of their signing bonuses go to those guys. Whether a draft would have actually eliminated that, at no point did anybody ever give me a clear understanding of how that would actually return more money to the players' pockets from the deal they sign. There would have been a little bit more money going to international amateurs. Like last year's 167 million, this year's 167 million in the current system. The league was proposing 191 when the draft would start next, in 2024. The players are proposing 260, for when the draft would start, 260 million. But the player side looked at the regular amateur draft and saw that, in 2024, when the international draft would start, U.S. amateurs, so the players who get drafted normally, the bonus pool there would be over $300 million. And so they look at it and go, well, it's still a really disparate amount, to be at 191 versus the 300 that's going to the U.S. amateurs. So the conclusion for the players was the offer was not fair. It was not for enough value, didn't achieve enough of what they wanted as far as addressing corruption and kind of bettering the lives of those players. And so they walked away.
It's pretty weird in retrospect that they were just like, we're just going to take 2 topics from the CBA and just punt them down the road. I don't know. I'm not like intimately familiar with how every other industry handles their CBA negotiations, but my understanding is that most of the time when you get a CBA, it's pretty complete, and then everybody kind of chills out after that. Doesn't continue to negotiate for 4 or 5 months about 2 very, I think very, very important topics. Now, the qualifying offer, and this was much discussed, is it really the type of thing that you would want to quote unquote trade for an international draft? And ultimately they did not. So I don't know, but the international draft is so unwieldy and takes so much consideration about those outside elements that you're talking about and the corruption and how it would affect those things, whether it would resolve those things, because of course those things need to be resolved sooner rather than later, according to all baseball fans, people in the industry, and the international governments of the world. But I guess I'm just curious. One of the things I'm so curious about how the CBA negotiations played out, and this is sort of reminding me of, is that, God, it really just seems like they put off everything to the very, very last minute. And was that your understanding of how things went? Like leading up to the lockout, there was basically no progress, right?
Correct. They were very far apart. Yes.
I guess, because I haven't yet, did you gain any kind of better understanding as to why it ends up playing out like that every time? Because, it doesn't need to. And I think that we said this every time we got on the podcast during the lockout. We said it didn't need to wait till this last moment. They could have been negotiating for the last 18 months. They could have been resolving some of the easier things to create goodwill. And honestly, both sides chose not to for whatever reason. And those reasons date back to 1994 and even prior to that. But having reported on it, having talked to people on both sides, do you feel like you better understand? Because I don't think a lot of baseball fans do understand why it seemed like they just didn't resolve any of the easy things at any point in the process.
Yeah. And I'm trying to remember what specific stories this came up in, but I definitely did quote some people who had been involved in baseball, and maybe even outside of baseball negotiations about this, like, Lauren Rich, who was at the MLBPA, back in the 90s, long out of baseball at this point, but it always waits till the last minute. It was basically the message I got. And it's about leverage creation. You don't want to move too soon and kind of give away your ground. It's about maximizing your return. You're maximizing whatever you can get out of a deal. And so it did to me become I don't know. Look, I actually do know that I didn't quite understand this at the beginning of the lockout because we did a little pool amongst some of the writers when the lockout started. Where were we? Dallas? Yeah, we were outside of Dallas. And those of us, some of us who were there, just did a little, take a date, and see if you're right. And I was dead wrong. I don't remember what I said. I think I might have said February. And I didn't understand at that point that both sides would probably be intent on pushing the other as far as they could. And, you'll hear one side or both sides say, well, we would have negotiated earlier if the other side was willing to, but clearly they weren't willing to negotiate. You got to take that, I guess, a little bit skeptically, right? It's very easy to say that, we're willing to move, but the other guy wasn't, so we didn't. Well, if you were willing to move, you did, but did you move? So I do think that's actually a kind of through line in negotiations, not even necessarily in collective bargaining, just in general, is that people don't move until they have to. And that was what was borne out here. And I do think that's something to keep in mind in the future with lockouts. If there's another one, I'm sure there will be. So that part in the end, well, although I didn't understand it at first, I do not look back on as surprising because that's what it's about. It's leverage creation.
We obviously have to talk about minor leaguers because we talk about that a lot on this show. But before we leave the CBA completely, I got to ask, do you know when it's dropping? like was the international draft was that kind of the last piece that they were either going to, copy paste something in or strike it entirely? But I know that
they're working in suggestion mode in Google Docs right now.
Right. I know that myself and honestly some of our listeners are going to the MLBPA or the agent's side, and just refreshing that documents page and nothing's there yet. So what's the holdup?
Yeah, my understanding is that it typically does take a few months. The last I heard was that it'd probably be out in the fall. I don't know if that means the off season, November, something like that. The reality is that the people in labor relations, my understanding is that the league is the one, at least kind of doing the initial draft of it. The union certainly will review it and sign off on it, but that it's the league side that's putting it together. And that some of the people involved, they are busy with some other things. It's a long process. And I don't say that facetiously. I can say many things facetiously, but they do have stuff to work on. Like, for example, you could imagine that, the Trevor Bauer case would be time consuming for labor relations such that, an individual involved there might need a little time to get to the CBA portion if they're dealing with Bauer. So, it'll get done. It's not atypical for it to take some time, but I too would like to see the damn thing at this point. But I think November, I want to say November was what I heard, but I'm not reporting that with confidence.
It's like a Frank Ocean album or like a Rihanna album. We keep hearing they're working on it. It's going to fucking drop. And then it's just like, oh, it just randomly drops next winter. So I guess we'll talk about it then.
They have an MOU and memorandum of understanding. They have something that they're operating off of as far as the changes, but no, they don't have the final language of that document that ends up being public, at this point. And the MOU seems to have been so far kept under, wraps pretty well.
Yeah. Though I think the large kind of scaffolding of that memorandum of understanding was what you guys were reporting on and what we were talking about at the time that sealed that deal. So the other elements of it are kind of legalese, so to speak.
Correct. I mean, I guess that's an interesting thing, whether there's anything in there that comes out that we didn't quite know about before.
Yeah.
The union at the end of the lockout, one of the stories, I think it was like the last one I did before I disappeared for like a month.
Rightfully so.
The union had sent a memo to agents and players, or at least agents, that listed out all the things that at least they were interested in pointing out. And so I wrote about that, and that's the framework.
Yeah. So we want to talk about the minor league labor story as it's evolved as well. When you leaned into this beat when you started covering, CBA elements and the structures and the levers of power in baseball, were you expecting the minor leagues to be one of those things? Because I don't think we were. We started talking about it and the conditions, and of course, people have been reporting on this, writing about this for years now, but it never seemed like a front and center conversation in the way that it does now. So were you surprised by that, or was there kind of some bubbling up about, those conditions and wanting to center them and improve them on the league side or the player side as you started to get into this industry and this beat?
Yeah, when my original iteration of the job was half business of baseball and half New York media coverage. Like I was doing Q&As with media people. And that quickly we realized that I needed to focus full time on business stuff. No, I don't think when I took the job, I was thinking or there was any discussion about the minor leagues are going to make a lot of noise. And I think truly what happened was advocates for minor leaguers came along and, you also had More Than Baseball, which is another organization, but you had these dedicated groups crop up that wanted to make noise. Were legitimate. These are operations that are, funded. Certainly advocates for minor leaguers has been, that are hiring, and they've already affected some change. So no, if I'm thinking back to my feeling in 19 when I took my job, that I think that, a minor league potential unionization effort would be afoot at that point in a way that people would be writing about, or that, the housing policy would change as quickly as it did. No. And I sometimes think back to when I was in college, I was a feature writer, unpaid, because that was what people did at that time. For scout.com, which at that point there was something called Inside Pitch Magazine, which was a little Mets magazine. And I was covering the Mets minor leagues. And so I spent my summer, covering the Binghamton Mets AA. They're now the Rumble Ponies, and the Brooklyn Cyclones. I did another summer. I did the same internship twice, which is, I don't know.
You loved it. You loved how it was unpaid the first time so much that you rolled right back through.
Or I just didn't understand that you're supposed to go and keep doing different things to climb in the world. I don't know.
They were like, they're paying me an experience. This is amazing.
Yeah. One of my buddies in Boston, would always, use the phrase exposure bucks. So yeah, I got exposure bucks. But yeah, I think back to that and kind of the, my upfront time with the minor leagues there. And to think about what, the topics of conversation are now, just how ingrained it was back then that you suffer and you will enjoy it. And it wasn't even like a consideration that you question the suffering. It has changed. The world has changed, it's 15 years. So yeah, it's existential crisis day for me, but, yeah. So yeah.
It certainly seems like a kind of a microcosm of a broader shift in society on how we think about labor, right? You talk about unpaid internships, and that's feels very akin to kind of what's happening in the minor leagues, and that discussion similarly in the last few years has really kind of come to the front and center, right? About kind of young or labor among young people and kind of how unfair it is and arguably should not be legal, right? It feels like,
or isn't legal in the case of a $185 billion settlement.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So I kind of, what do you feel like is kind of coming next in this discussion? There's obviously the Senate Judiciary Committee that's having this dialogue with Major League Baseball and advocates for minor leaguers. Do you feel like that has teeth at all? Is it kind of more a way to kind of show that the Senate actually can get something done, does have interests? What do you feel like is coming down the pipeline?
It's I think frankly too early to tell how serious the Senate Judiciary Committee inquiry is. If they end up holding a hearing, well, that is a step more serious than simply sending letters of requests for information to Manfred and to advocates. If they hold a hearing and then subsequently introduce legislation, well, that's a step more serious than just holding a hearing. You know, it's a midterm year. If they're going to hold a hearing, you would think it would have to be, not long from now. You know, it can't be that far away if they're going to do it. But you know, would it be surprising if in the end they don't hold a hearing? No, I think in politics, very little is surprising these days. So there are people who are kind of indicating, look, this is serious. It is on its face more serious than some other efforts like the one last year when you'd had just the Republican senators introduce a bill attacking the antitrust exemption, because this is bipartisan, right? And it is the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it is the two top members of that committee, Durbin and Grassley, who are involved. But how far they take it, whether Grassley, who represents a state that has 6 blackout teams, right? Iowa, you can't watch. I don't know what you can watch in Iowa, but is he just trying to extract his pound of flesh?
It's so funny to imagine Chuck Grassley sitting at home, not being able to watch a marquee game and being like, you know what? It's time to get the gears in motion. It's time to take away this antitrust exemption. It's gone too long.
He's tried to, block out his IP address. He's gone through all the different ways to illegally access it. I'm not encouraging that.
Does Chuck Grassley know what a VPN is? Like,
yeah,
I don't think
exactly.
so.
Chuck Grassley know what a computer is? It's not clear to me, maybe. I want to ask you something that's probably very complicated to ask or answer and slightly thorny. So take it whatever direction that you want to. But how do you handle, because we handle it in a very aggressive way, but how do you handle when what one of the sides, more often the league side, in my opinion, what they say seems very obviously false? Because I feel like with regards to the minor leagues, this comes up very often. With regards to the opaque financial nature of Major League Baseball in the 21st century, in terms of how much revenue they're bringing in, how much they're actually spending, how much they are making. We don't know all of those things, though we know that many of the claims that the league has made in the past are false, or are half-truths, or are not telling the full story. And as this picture becomes clearer and clearer and clearer, because of reporting from people like you, because of conversation about these things, because players are talking more openly about it, how do you handle where to come down on some of these statements and some of these claims that Major League Baseball makes?
It probably depends on the individual story, and the individual circumstance. Certainly there are times when I don't print something at all. I remember there was a sentence I removed. If MLB gives you a statement, typically you're going to print whatever either side says on the record. There was a statement related to the minor leagues that MLB gave that had a sentence that said something like, the industry is trying to improve things, or something like that. And I just chose not to print that one sentence of the statement on the feeling that MLB does not speak for the industry. It is, as much as it may want to, it is not. And I do remember MLB being mad that I didn't print that. And I explained why, to my editors why we shouldn't do it. And we didn't. So I think most of the times I try to contextualize it. Are there quick hit stories where I don't pick apart every sentence? Yes. I think one of the good things about the minor league situation is you have advocates for minor leaguers and Harry Marino, the executive director, and Garrett Brocious, who also is over there, who have very often been willing to speak on the record and kind of make the arguments themselves. Ideally, as a reporter, you have a third party who's you're relaying third party information. I think is ideal, but you also have the ability and an obligation to contextualize things that are half truths or are inaccurate. And I've tried to do that a lot. I know there are people who don't like that I've tried to do that a lot, and I think a lot of times it ends up being, like when people are making off the record arguments to you, they want you to print them. And if you sit there and go, well, this is not this is not a valid argument, you can just choose not to print it. And certainly there are times I do that. So what I've said in the past, and I guess I'm kind of expounding on that, is you have to have a very high filter. And I have tried to have a very high filter. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean that one of the things that can happen is if you take a lot of time in a story to go into exposition or context, you can almost distract from the main part of it. It's a tricky balance. So it depends. If I'm doing a really long 3,000 word story, on something, like, yeah, I'm going to get to the context of whether the experiments in the minor leagues are something that minor league players like, not just the question of how do these affect the playing rules in Major League Baseball, right? There's all sorts of context that you try to get to. If it's a 400 word story that's quick, it might not always be there. And that might not mean that that's good. It may be the case that every time you write about something, you have the full context, but, it can get repetitive. During labor, I think we tried every time to, when finances would come up, I think the vast majority of times I've written about finances or kind of the league saying, revenues, I would say, well, we can't verify this, right? I would note this is not something we can verify. And so, yeah, you're constantly thinking about things like that. And it's tricky. It's, I don't know if it's an art form, but it requires constant thought is what I'm saying.
It's kind of like pushing the rock up the hill, to be honest, because you're just never going to know all of the financial picture of baseball. And the reason I asked is because I think that you do a really good job of it. And it's the reason that we so often cite your articles on the podcast, is because they do have a lot of that context that is very hard to parse through, is very hard to explain, is important to get from both sides. But I was just curious because that financial picture of baseball is just never gonna be fully clear as long as it's, privately owned by the billionaire owners who run the sport.
Yeah, there was a what was the quote? It was Manfred was asked about, this was 19 or 20. It was 19. It was after an owners meetings in New York, and ESPN was there and was asking him about whether there was it was like outside the lines, OTL. I think Jeremy Schaap was there, like a couple producers. And I think it was a producer who was asking the question about whether MLB had data on injuries caused by the ball. I don't believe it was injuries caused by the bat, but this was in regards to netting, and they were newly putting up the netting, I think, going back to 19. Manfred had an answer that I think I used, and I did a long story on him a couple of years ago, like a 5,000 word story or something like that. Where in denying, in when this ESPN person asks for, like, can you give us more of this information? He said something to the effect of, that's not how business is done in America. And it was a very, I can find it as you guys, as we have an interlude to the next question, but, it stuck out at me, at the time as, wow, yeah, he's right. And it's true. It's not just baseball, right?
Nakedly philosophical and how they approach the whole nature of answering questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Well, and that kind of, speaks to the last question that I wanted to ask you, and you've obviously been very generous with your time. But this is a discussion that we were kind of having on our last episode about Rob Manfred and kind of his effectiveness as a commissioner, right? And whether or not he is actually a good commissioner. I think obviously that the answer to that question kind of probably depends on the perspective that you're looking at it from, right? Are you asking that as a fan? Are you asking that as an owner? Are you asking that as a player?
I'm taking the owner's perspective on this one, Alex. I'm just getting myself in that mindset. Yeah, I feel like Steve Cohen frequently. We operate a very similar life and in a similar space.
But I'm kind of curious from your perspective. What is your read on kind of his tenure over the last, I guess, 7+ years? Not that you've been covering him specifically that entire time, but like, do you get the sense that the owners are happy with kind of the way that he has performed, protected their interests while somewhat advancing the cause of baseball? It's obviously it's a thorny question. It's an impossible one to answer, but I'm curious what you think of it.
Yeah, the quote was, honestly, we collect all sorts of data that we don't release to the public. That's sort of the way people do business in America.
Yeah, I love that because it kind of speaks to his sort of,
yes.
He's such an enigma because he does kind of lay all this stuff out for you so often that it's like, are you supposed to be saying that to us?
Well, he's a lawyer, he is so adept at lawyer speak, but it doesn't always translate to commissioner speak. And sometimes it does, because sometimes you're talking about CBA negotiations, but sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're talking about rule changes. Sometimes you're talking about the state of baseball in America. Sometimes you're talking about fun players. Like, it's just, that's Rob. That's the Rob experience. But yes, Evan, I'm so curious to hear what you think.
Yeah. So the place to start might actually be an assessment of Bud Selig, which was, or is, that he was certainly avuncular, came off as, and he did truly love looking at the box score and all these things every night. Right. But underneath that was a guy whose prime interest was the interest of the owners. So he had this varnish that effectively kind of hid or masked or distracted from what he was also doing. And people wrote about it. It's not like people didn't understand it. Manfred, in a weird way, I almost prefer Manfred's style because it is more direct. It is not like, I don't think the thing to want is someone who makes you feel good, but is actually doing something very different from what he makes you feel, which is what I think a lot of people do want. Is they want that.
Yeah, they want Adam Silver, bro.
Right.
Yeah, they want Uncle Bud. They want Uncle Bud up there. Now, that said, Manfred, at this point, there's enough body of evidence. The guy lacks touch. He tries, you can tell there are times, and he goes into press conferences like he did at the All-Star game, trying to be calm, trying to be kind of light, but he can get revved up. He does not know how to land things well. He is a lawyer. You can tell he's a lawyer. He does not have the charisma of an Adam Silver or these other people. It doesn't mean he lacks charisma entirely. It's just that the public speaking, winning over hearts and minds part of his job is not what he's good at. And at this point, I'm not sure he's going to reach that point. It's kind of wondering over the last few years, does he start to get better? Does he kind of avoid the steps, stepping in it? And he doesn't. And so that's just who he is. The owners, even during the lockout, you saw it. They have to corral some owners sometimes. He was not a unanimous selection at the start of his campaign for commissioner. Remember, Tom Warner ran against him. Tim Brosnan as well. If things are fading from my memory. Another executive at MLB was interested in the job as well. There were two other contenders, and there was ownership support certainly for Werner, the Red Sox chairman. So it's not like the faction of owners who didn't like him back then. Every single one of them has now been won over, and everybody thinks he's great. And I interviewed Bud Selig when he did his book publicity. His book came out in 19, and he made some comment. Yeah, what a time. He made some comment then about how some of the power had come and gone with him, with Bud. And I asked him to elaborate on it, and probably sensing that he had said something that piqued my interest, he kind of then, scurried away the topic.
So my book, Evan.
Yeah, it's all in my book. It's all, completely accurate, not overly rosy at all. Bud Selig's book, but, so no, he does not have the love of every owner, certainly not at every moment. And they have to corral the owners through a lockout, get people to get on board. He ultimately knows his job is to protect their interests, make them money. I'm not saying that he doesn't think he has some interest in the quote unquote greater good of the game, but he's very forward about what his position is. He said to me when I interviewed him for that long story I did a couple of years ago, that it was reasonable to compare him to the CEO of Major League Baseball, that he is not the arbiter of all that is good and righteous in baseball. And the reality is that there hasn't really been a commissioner like that ever, maybe aside from Landis. Faye Vincent fancied himself that, I think. But, whether that's ever been the commissioner's job or anything close to the commissioner's job in modern times, but that's what people want. They want Uncle Bud, as I'm like knocking over things here. And, even if you have an Uncle Bud up there who stands up there and makes you feel good, I don't think that job's ever going to be much different. That doesn't mean you couldn't have somebody who's like, does things, handles certain things better than Manfred. You can certainly, there's a long list of things you can look back on and say, well, gee, Rob Manfred could have handled that better. And some of that is by his own admission. He's admitted some things he could have done better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of those things is that after the CBA was signed, he came out and was like, oh, I probably could have done, better with player relations. And I called Tony and I said X. And it's probably a little bit too early to assess whether or not that has actually played out any differently than it had been going for the past 5 or 6 years. But I don't know. One small follow up on that, and then we'll let you get out of here. Is I guess I'm curious if you think that they would put a Rob type in next after Rob, or would they kind of go back to the well of a former owner who acutely understands those interests, like Bud, who has had that personal experience with wanting to get more cash in your own pocket, or would it be like someone who would come up through the league office, been involved in negotiations on a minute level? Do you have any kind of sense on that?
No, except that if you look at what's going on in the other leagues, and you kind of look at the history of it, it probably makes more sense that it would be not an owner. It would be my guess. And it doesn't mean an owner couldn't, curry enough favor with his owner buddies and make a run that, but Stern, Bettman, Manfred, it is certainly the flavor of the day is to have a trained, lawyer who is in that role. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember off the top of my head whether Silver was a labor lawyer or not. But certainly, Bettman was Proskauer. David Stern, I believe, was also Proskauer. So that has been the progression, has been lawyers. And so it would be a departure, put it that way, if they went a different direction.
Yeah, it certainly strikes me as them wanting to have someone who is deftly skilled in the art of public relations and kind of that legalese perspective, especially given how much of this is now kind of playing out in the open, right? How many people are paying attention to what the commissioner is saying? It's hard to put someone up there who might speak a little more rosily about the state of the game or something when people are asking very tough questions to answer. And Manfred, for better or for worse, is kind of willing to meet the moment, right? And say what's on his mind, whether that's the right thing or not. So
yeah. And if you get a different commission, I do think it would. If the question is what serves the interests of the commissioner's office and the owners better, it would be somebody who does a better job of winning over hearts and minds publicly. Mm-hmm. But if you have that person, does that mean that the material pursuits are any different? My guess is no. And I'm not saying that in defense of the pursuits they have now. I'm not saying that what the league office is doing is right or just or is what they should be doing. I'm just skeptical that if you have a different person in there, that they're actually behind the scenes going to be doing much that's different. But they'll make you feel better, and people like to feel good. You like to turn on the news and see a cute dog jumping around. I mean,
we should make a dog the commissioner of Major League Baseball. That would be the highest approval rating possible. I hope we made people feel good with this interview. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it's received. Evan Drellich, The Athletic. Is there anything that you would like to plug? Let people know where they can find, where they can go get your work, anything you're working on specifically that you'd like the lovely listeners of Tipping Pitches to go check out.
My book, Winning Fixes Everything, is out on Valentine's Day. So right after the Super Bowl, right in time for spring training. I think it is a look at the Astros scandal and the modern management of a baseball team in a way people have not had before. And I've worked on it for a long time, and I do hope everybody checks it out.
It's so romantic. Valentine's Day.
It's my love letter to baseball.
Evan, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
So I read about it. They say it's just fairy tales.
Okay. Thank you to Evan Drellich. Thank you to fill-in chef Jordan Shusterman. Thank you to all of our new patrons this week. CJ, Dara, Nicholas, Adeline, Jason, Alexander, Nirvan, and Nick. Special shout out to the 5 members of the Alex Rodriguez VIP Club tier on our Patreon. We shout out 5 of those members at the end of every episode, no matter what. Those members this week are Diogo, Heather, Margarita, Stratton, and William. You may have noticed that we did not spend any time on this episode up until this point talking about the death of Vin Scully. Of course, we, like the rest of the baseball community, are mourning Vin's loss. He is truly the most legendary and iconic broadcaster in baseball, but one of the most legendary and iconic members of the United States baseball community. And we are going to spend much more time talking about Vin and his career and him as a person and what he meant to the baseball world when Alex is back next week. One final piece of housekeeping. We have a live Q&A that will be executed as a watch-along with Yankees Red Sox on Sunday Night Baseball on August 14th. This is exclusively for our Alex Rodriguez VIP Club tier members of the Patreon. More information to come both in our newsletters as well as on the Patreon messaging system, as well as in Slack. It will not be hard for you to find where to participate in that when August 14th rolls around. But if you're interested in that and you're not a member of the A-Rod VIP Club tier, just consider checking it out. Thank you so much for listening to this very packed episode, and we will talk to you next week.
Everybody, I'm Alex Rodriguez. Tipping pitches.
Tipping pitches.
This is the one that I love the most.
Tipping pitches.
So we'll see you next week. See ya!